Thank you for inviting me to speak this morning. I hope I can shed some light on the issue. I would like to start with my disclaimers. Any U.S. federal tax advice contained in this communication, including any attachments, was not intended or written to be used and cannot be used for the purpose of avoiding tax-related penalties under IRS code or promoting, marketing, or recommending to another party any tax-related matter addressed herein. I just came from the IRS conference, so I have to say that. Also, I am not an attorney, and this is not legal advice. If you want legal advice, please go to your attorney. Basically, when Alicia described what she wanted to do today, I was thinking we would limit the scope. Usually what I talk about is how to file with the FEC, how to use the software, different things of that nature. Today, I'm going to limit that to state filing, state registration of state and local party committees, how state and local party committees can file with the FEC if they want to, not file with the FEC if they don't want to. So it's going to be fairly limited. I was going to do an overview of the website, www.fec.gov, point you to the campaign guide for political party committees, which has information for state and local party committees as well as national committees, and tell you a little about the FEC information line. Then we're going to discuss rules for registration, contributions, different issues with contributions. Let's see, what else we're going to talk about. Coordinated party activities, exempt party activities, federal election activities, which is FEA, which is very specific, party coordination, and joint fundraising dues and don'ts when you have federal and state and local party fundraising. Does that sound like things that you'd like to discuss, or is there anything else I should include?
I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I think we're good.
That's good? Okay, great. The first thing we can start with is the FEC website, which really has almost everything you need to know. This is the FEC website. It's www.fec.gov. And one of the places to start is the library, which you can click at the bottom of the page, and that will take you to campaign guides and supplements. The campaign guide that we are using today is the campaign guide for political party committees. The last version was August 2013, and they do issue updates between the times that they publish the actual party guides. And this is basically what it looks like. This is what we're going to be using for the basis of what we're doing today. It has the FEC contact information in it. It has toll-free helplines, and really the toll-free helpline is very good. It's 202-694-1000 or 1100, and they really do give you a lot of guidance there. So even if you're not registered with the FEC, if you have questions, you can call them. If you are registered with the FEC, they can help you also, obviously. So that's how you can start getting information about it. The first thing we can talk about is going to be the registration. What's required? What are the rules for registration? And that's found in Chapter 1 of the campaign guide.
Hold it.
The issue of whether to register or not to register is really up to each organization. I talked about it with the FEC analysts and with the information people, and they don't want you to register if you don't have to, because it's not worth it for you not to have any federal activity and have to file zero reports. So if you really don't have any federal activity, if you don't anticipate federal activity, don't bother to register. And the registration thresholds are if you spend more than $1,000 in contributions or other expenditures, or you raise more than $1,000 in contributions. Again, those are federal contributions. Those aren't state and local contributions. Your state and local contributions are guided by your state law. For a local organization has more leeway. It is required to register if it raises more than $5,000 in contributions and spends more than $5,000 on exempt party activities. We'll discuss what exempt party activities are later in the discussion. Also, if it makes more than $1,000 in contributions to a federal candidate, or if it spends more than $1,000 in other expenditures on federal activities. So, those are the thresholds. Now, if you are raising this money for federal activities, you have to comply with federal rules. That requires that you can't accept contributions from corporations or unions. The contributions have to agree with the limits. They cannot be from foreign nationals. They cannot be from federal contractors. And those are the general rules. There are other rules under that, but those are the most conspicuous rules. Does anyone have any questions about the thresholds? Okay. Now let me see. Oh, the law of agency is also very important. If someone acts as an agent, even if your committee is not participating in this kind of activity to your knowledge, if someone who is an agent of your committee is participating in this activity, your committee can be required to register. So you have to be very conscious of who's doing what on behalf of your committee. And the agents of the committee are anyone who is expending or disbursing any funds for federal election activities on your behalf, transferring or accepting transfers of funds for federal election activities, engaging in joint fundraising activity. If any part of the funds should be used for federal election activity, we're going to be talking about joint fundraisers because those are very specific to what you can and can't do for federal, non-federal fundraising. And anyone who is soliciting any funds on your behalf for 501c4 organizations or 527 organizations that are not political committees. So if you're affiliated with any organization like that and also doing federal activity, you have to be very careful that they're not pushing you over the threshold. Now, an entity of a committee is also very important. These are the criteria for entities of committee. Any person or sponsor or agent who directly or indirectly owns a controlling interest in the voting stock or securities of the entity who's also associated with the committee can be an entity. Anyone who directly or indirectly has the authority or ability to direct or participate in governing the entity can be an agent. Directly or indirectly has the authority or ability to hire or fire and is also making decisions for your corporation and is indulging in certain activity can be an agent. Has overlapping membership, has overlapping officers, has any officers or employees who are members, officers, or employees of the entity. This is going to be very important when we talk about coordination, because if you coordinate communications on behalf of federal candidates, you can indirectly make a contribution to those candidates, and you cannot make contributions if you are not registered as federal candidates. Only registered committees can make contributions to the national party, to a federal candidate, to any federal organization. So unless you're registered with the FEC and have a federal account, you cannot make a contribution. And we ran into this issue when we were discussing memberships in state and local parties and the national party. If you get a membership check, say one check that includes funds for state and local party membership and the national party membership, you cannot deposit that check into a non-federal account and then send that money to the national committee. You either have to have two separate checks, one to the state party and one to the national party, or you have to do it through an online contribution or however you want to do it, but you can't take money, put it in a non-federal account, and send it to a federal account. Now, it can work the other way. A federal account can send money to a non-federal account, but a non-federal account cannot send money to a federal account. Are there any questions about that? Because that's very important.
I don't see any hands.
Okay? If you are registered, you can have three types of funds. You can have a federal account, and that is an account in which only federal money is deposited, money that complies with the fundraising restrictions of the FEC. So, again, the limits on how much can be contributed, on the types of contributors, and on the reporting requirements. So only federal funds can be deposited into a federal account. You can have a non-federal account, and the non-federal account complies with state law. So your state funds, whatever your limits are, you can raise funds from corporations, unions, or whatever, that's fine. Those go into the non-federal account. You cannot combine the federal and the non-federal accounts. They always have to remain separate if you are registered. If you're not registered, it doesn't make any difference because you won't have a federal account. Levin funds, I know very few people who use them, but they can be a combination of some federal funds and some state funds. And they're only used for certain type of federal election activity. We'll discuss federal election activity later. But I don't know a lot of people who use Levin funds. Okay. Now, is anyone there registered? Is anyone in the room registered?
The state of Nevada, the state of South Carolina, Alabama. Did I see your name, Paula? In what state?
Indiana.
Indiana.
Okay, great.
So at least 4.
At least 4. Okay, great. So you're already reported.
Yes.
And you're familiar with the restrictions on federal and non-federal accounts.
Yeah, the others in the room may or may not be, but at least those are.
Okay. So I'm assuming that the people who are registered understand how to maintain the account.
I see heads nodding.
Okay, great. So I won't go into that. That would be a waste of your time. Let's look at contributions and affiliation, because the affiliation is important for the registered committees. What a contribution is, according to the FEC, is anything that is a gift of goods and services, a loan, a guarantee, an endorsement, bank loan. The one thing that's dangerous that I find is that a lot of people aren't familiar with in-kind contributions and the implications of in-kind contributions, and I want to pay particular attention to those. An in-kind contribution can result if, for example, a bank gives you a very favorable loan rate. So say your candidate's family or friends own a bank, and the bank gives a loan to the committee, and the loan is like a 0.5% interest loan. The difference between the interest on that loan and a loan given at fair market value could be imputed to be an in-kind contribution. If a vendor gives you a very good rate on rent or anything else like that, sells you computers very, very cheaply, that can be imputed to be an in-kind contribution, and it has to be disclosed. So if you are a federal organization and a corporation gives you a benefit of that nature, that could be a prohibited contribution. You want to be very careful and make sure that any transaction that you participate in on behalf of the committee are arm's length transactions. They're fair market value. They are offered on the same terms that the vendor would offer to anyone else. Because I have seen circumstances under which in-kind contributions have been imputed. Those were invalid contributions, and the committees have been fined. So you want to be careful about that. Any questions on in-kinds? Are people familiar with those concepts?
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, great. Let me see. Oh, advances of personal funds. Advances of personal funds are considered contributions if the person is not reimbursed by the committee within time limits. The time limits are 30 days after payment by cash or personal check, 60 days after the closing date of the billing statement if it's a charge. So if you have volunteers working, you be very careful about what purchases the volunteers make on your behalf, or people who are employees of the committee. Make sure that you are aware of any purchases they're making on the committee's behalf, because those have to be reimbursed within the time limit, or they could be imputed to the contributions. And if those purchases are over a certain limit, they are illegal contributions and you can be fined. So you want to make certain about that. Guarantees of bank loans are another dangerous point, because if someone is guarantoring a bank loan for the committee, that amount guaranteed can count against the guarantor's limit, so that could be imputed to be an in-kind contribution. So you want to make sure that if you do have a guarantor, that the payments will reduce the amount of the guarantor's commitment. Because if you do, I've seen that happen on large national campaigns when somebody guarantees a loan and then the FEC says, oh no, this is a contribution, and they say it's an illegal contribution. So you don't want to get involved in that. Those are some of the trickier things that a lot of people don't know about. Let's see, I'm trying to think of anything else. Are there any questions from the group about extensions of credit or anything like that? Do you run into that at all? I don't want to go over things that you don't have any need to know.
It looks like no.
Okay. Fundraising for when someone donates a room, anything of that nature? You don't have anything like that?
No.
Okay. One thing I do want to emphasize too, contributions in the name of another. If you have looked at the controversy about Bitcoins and things like that, contributions in the name of another are prohibited. You cannot make contributions in the name of another. So one of the issues about Bitcoins was, how can we be sure that this is someone's account? If anyone makes a donation on behalf of, say a parent makes a donation on behalf of a child can make his or her own donation. A husband and wife can make joint donations. You can not have someone subrogating a contribution on behalf of someone else, and I've seen committees run into problems on that. So that's what I wanted to cover on contributions. Now, I did want to look at the contribution limits, just so you'll know them. The contribution limits for 2013 to 2014. Individuals can get $2,600 per election. That is the primary and the general. So the total that an individual can give is $5,200. To a PAC, they can get $5,000 a year. To a state, district, local party committee, they can get $10,000 a year combined limit. Now the combined limit includes the state, district, and local parties. So those of you who are registered have to keep track of what's being given to your district and local party committees. Because if you go over the limit, you will have to refund the excess contribution, and you could be fined in addition. So you do want to keep track of those things. What's your name? The National Party Committee can accept $32,400 per year. And some of you may have heard that the biannual limits have been struck down by the Supreme Court, so there are no more biannual limit restrictions. State, district, local party committees can give $5,000 to candidate committees per election combined limit, $5,000 per year combined limit to pass. And there are unlimited transfers to other party committees. That is national party committees and state, district, and local party committees. The FEC does not care how much you transfer. You just have to record all the transfers. The National Party Committee can get $5,000 per election to candidate committees, $5,000 per year to pass. And the presidential committees are separate. Generally, state and local party committees can give money to presidential committees, but we'll discuss the limits on that. Those are usually coordinated party expenditures.
Okay, looks like we have one question for you right
here.
Sure.
Sure.
Hi, Paula. It's Aaron Starr. I've got a couple questions. On the individual, where you have individual giving $10,000 per year combined limit to state and local party committees, I assume then that a state party, in order to be in compliance, really needs to track all of their county's federal election activities and contributions to make that work. Otherwise, they have a problem. Is that right?
It's from an individual, exactly. So it's because these parties are considered affiliated for purposes of the limit, and we'll go into that a little bit more later. But yes, you should really track that, because if you don't, you can go over the limit.
So basically, a state party.
And this is for your registered. Again, this is only for your registered committees, because the other committees shouldn't be accepting federal money. I mean, they shouldn't have federal accounts. So this is only for your registered committees.
Right, and I assume that in the big box where you have unlimited transfers to other party committees, just to be really clear, this is only transfers among FEC filers and rather FEC accounts. So any federal monies are transferred.
Exactly.
You can't have a transfer
exactly.
State
These are all
funds to a federal fund.
Exactly, because non-federal committees cannot transfer funds into federal accounts. So these are only among federal accounts.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay. I know the National Committee was very happy when the biennial limit was struck down, so I guess they're looking for everything to be struck down, but I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, we have some large numbers that will benefit.
Yeah. Okay, let me go into affiliation a little bit more. Oh, the affiliated. Oh, no, not affiliated tax. Okay. Okay, what we were discussing a minute ago, affiliation and the contribution limit. This is in Chapter 1 of the Party Guide if you want more information on how affiliation works. But it means that state committees and local committees together may receive a maximum of $10,000 per calendar year from any one individual or non-multi-candidate committee contributor. So, again, and also that affiliation rule applies to candidates. So the state committee and local committees together may not contribute more than $5,000 to a candidate per election. So you have to track it not only for contributions, but for contributions to the committees, but contributions from the committee to federal candidates. So you have to make sure that you don't include the contributions for either one, because those are affiliated limits. Any question on that? Okay. Now, there is an exception, and I haven't seen it. I've seen it only rarely. But some local committees do operate under their own separate set of contribution limits, but they have to demonstrate to the FEC that they are independent. So if the local party committee can file with the FEC, they have to request an advisory opinion, and they can demonstrate to the FEC that they are independent of the state party committee, then they can have their own limits, and they don't have to affiliate with the state party committee for the purposes of limits. Okay? All right, moving right along. Okay, I wanted to discuss the coordination and the coordinated party expenditures. One advantage to being registered with the FEC is, obviously you can participate in federal election activity, whereas if you're not registered, you can't participate. You can make coordinated party expenditures. Coordinated party expenditures are defined in law. Not in law, but they're defined by FEC regulations. And there are limits set to how much parties can participate with a candidate without making a contribution. So they can have certain activity on behalf of the candidate. They can participate in certain federal election activities without making a contribution to the candidate. And this gives them more leeway in assisting the candidate without going over the limits. National committees are authorized to make coordinated party expenditures, and state committees can make coordinated party expenditures. State and local committees may make them, but their limits are usually fairly small, so they're going to affect it. The formulas are set up at the beginning of the year, and they're dependent upon the population of the United States, and they're dependent upon the COLA. So you have to go to the FEC website to find out what your expenditure limits are. Now, there's a difference between party expenditures and contributions. You want, in my opinion, what I think works best is you want to push as much into party coordinated expenditures as possible because the limit is much higher. If you have activity that you've done on behalf of the committee and it's construed to be a contribution, you're running into limits and you're not able to do as much. So as much activity that you can report, that you can make a coordinated party expenditure is much better. For example, it says the payment of a campaign bill could be treated and reported as a coordinated party expenditure, while a check payable to the candidate could not. It would have to be treated as a contribution, and you have limits on the contributions. So whatever activity you participate in for a candidate, you want to make sure that it's coordinated as much as possible. Now, that is, again, for federally registered committees. Committees that are non-federally registered cannot do this. If they do it, they can be imputed to be making illegal contributions. And one thing that you want to make sure of, and we'll discuss in chapters later on, if you're not registered and you are found to be coordinating with a candidate, then it could result in an illegal contribution that hurts your candidate. It won't hurt you because you're not registered, but it will hurt your candidate. Well, it could hurt you, but it could really hurt your candidate. So you want to make sure that if you're not registered, you're not coordinating with a federal candidate. Okay? Any questions about that? And as I said, we'll discuss it in more detail later.
I don't see any hands.
Okay. No hands? Okay, great. Some of the activities that are permitted, one of the big activities is slate cards and sample ballots. Again, this is for registered committees. These are considered exempt party committees. Exempt party activities for registered committees. State or local party committees can prepare and distribute slate cards, sample ballot, palm cards, other printed lists, and they're not considered contributions or expenditures, but they have to meet the following conditions. And the conditions are not bad, but you just have to make sure you meet them, because I've seen people turn in other committees. So opponents will get your stuff and turn you in. So you want to make sure you conform to the requirements. You have to have at least 3 candidates running for election for any public office. They can be federal, non-federal, whatever, but they have to have at least 3 candidates. You don't publicly disseminate the list through broadcast stations, newspapers, magazines. You hand them out. Direct mail you can do, but you can't do it through public communications. You can hand them out. You can mail them. You can put them in people's doors. The content is limited to the identification of each candidate. You can use pictures, but you can't have philosophy, you can't have a platform, you can't have anything like that. You can give the voting time and place, tell them, urge them to vote in general, but you can't give a whole lot of platform information. And if there are any costs that are applicable to federal candidates, those are paid for with permissible funds. If you do this correctly, you don't have to allocate. But if you don't do it correctly, you may have to allocate funds as part of a contribution. So if you stay within those limits, you usually don't have to allocate. The volunteer activity is considered exempt party activity. If it is conducted, again, these are the requirements, and remember, your opponents will turn you in. If you have the activity on behalf of the party's nominees or presumptive nominees, there was one case I remember where they had that the nominee hadn't been officially recognized by the convention, but you can have a presumptive nominee, so that applies. Volunteers distribute the materials. You can't have paid campaign workers doing that. The materials are not distributed again through public communication, which is considered television, radio, newspapers, magazines, billboards, direct mail. Now, one thing that is exempt that I didn't emphasize, the internet so far is not considered public communication. So the public communication rules do not apply to the internet. It's kind of still wild territory out there as far as independent expenditures, things like that are concerned. You can't use materials purchased by the National Party Committee for the purchase of these materials. This has to be strictly state and local. So any funds that you receive from the National Party cannot be used for this. They can be used for ballot access and things like that, but they can't be used for this type of material and have it considered exempt party activity. Party committee does not use funds designated for a particular federal candidate. Somebody's given earmark money. If you have money that's transferred from the federal committee, from the federal candidates committee to your committee, you can't use anything of that nature for this type of material. You can't have a payment from a non-federal campaign to help pay for these materials. And costs allocable to federal candidates are paid with permissible funds. Again, if you do this correctly, you don't have to allocate. You can do voter drives for presidential nominees, and that's very important. Again, the same basic restrictions. You have to have the activity, and the activity cannot involve public communication. If you have phone banks, they have to be operated by volunteers. You can have someone design the system, you can have a professional design the system, but the people actually making the phone calls have to be volunteers. And they're not soliciting funds. That's another thing that they don't really emphasize here. But you're not soliciting funds. This is just a voter drive. And let me see what else. Oh, yeah, and here are the rules for the, on the reference to the House and Senate. Any reference to U.S. House or Senate candidate must be incidental to the overall activity. You can do it for presidential, but House or Senate, you can just say, I don't know, maybe supported by so-and-so for the Senate or whatever, but you can't, this cannot be on behalf of the U.S. House or Senate candidate, it has to be on behalf of the presidential nominee. The phone banks, again, they have to be staffed by volunteers. They, if you refer to a clearly identified federal candidate when you're running a phone bank, you have to allocate the expenditure. So if you're specifically running a phone bank for a federal candidate, You have to make sure to track that. If you're running it for more than a federal candidate, for a state or local candidate and a federal candidate, you have to allocate the cost of the phone bank. So make sure if you're doing that, if this isn't just general get out and vote activity, if this is trying to get support for specific candidates, that you allocate those costs. If it includes another reference that refers to other candidates, you can't, let's see. If you just say come out and vote for his team, you can do that. But if you say come out and vote for President John Doe and Senator so-and-so, then you got a problem. You can't solicit any contributions or donations from any person when you run this phone bank, and they're not exempt from the definition of contribution expenditure. If you satisfy all these conditions, 50% is attributed to the federal candidate as in kind or coordinated. It's better to do it as coordinated again than in kind if you can. And it must be paid for with federal funds. The remaining 50% is not attributed to the candidate, but it must be paid for with federal funds. So you have to allocate. Any questions about phone banks for presidential? You got 2 years to worry about that.
Got one question walking up to the microphone.
Okay, sure.
Paula, this is Aaron again. This is more of a general, this is more of a general question because obviously this is, you got a lot of information. We're all trying to drink water out of a fire hose here. It's kind of difficult to absorb it all. But I have one really basic question, which is this. It seems like all of the activities of state parties are very regulated. There's lots of complex calculations for allocations and so forth. Can we get around a lot of that by simply funneling a lot of the activities through the federal candidates themselves? So if federal candidates were to raise the money and spend on these activities, avoiding a lot of these allocations, a lot of the rules. I'm most interested in how do I make it easier for state parties to comply. I'm wondering if that would be where they don't have to register. I'm wondering if that may be a way for them to do that.
It can. Again, when I talked about this with the FEC analysts and everybody, if you want to make sure that people don't get confused, and we're going to talk about joint fundraising and other things like that, the main thing is to make sure that the money doesn't get mixed up. That no one writes you one check and says, okay, I want half of this to go to Senator John whatever, half of it to go to the state party, and you're not registered. You can't do that. You have to, again, as you said, have them write a separate check, go online, make a separate contribution. Any membership fees, because different parties have membership fees. You cannot have an individual write one check to the state party for membership in the national party. It has to be made, two separate checks have to be made out, one to the state party, one to the national party. So the main issue in this is not to combine funds. Does that answer your question? Or?
Yes.
Okay. And it is complex, but once you get it down, I mean, the big national parties all do it, and they get through it, and they raise a lot of money. They're very effective at raising a lot of money. So even though it's difficult, in some ways, it's very effective with supporting your candidates and getting them elected. So I just want to say that in favor of it. Let me see. Okay. Federal election activity. I had a question on what is federal election activity? And I do want to touch on that because it is, as we say, it's a term of art. It can trigger special reporting requirements. Even if you're not registered, if you're doing this, you can get tagged. So you want to make sure you understand what it is. You cannot use any non-federal funds for federal election activity. Please remember that. Because if someone catches you again, they'll turn you in. There are 4 types of federal election activity. And review this. Voter registration activity during the period 120 days before a regularly scheduled federal election, including the election day itself. So if you're getting people registered 120 days and you are using, and this is related to a federal election. Now, if it's related to the state local election, don't worry about it. Federal election only. Then that's federal election activity. Voter identification, get out the vote, generic campaign activity conducted in connection with an election in which a candidate for federal office appears on the ballot. That is federal election activity. You cannot use non-federal funds for that. Any public communication, again, a public communication is newspaper, television, radio, direct mail, anything like that, that promotes, attacks, supports, or opposes a candidate for that office. That communication does not have to advocate the election or defeat of the candidate to qualify as federal election activity. You can attack the person and not say that you want somebody else elected. But anything that falls under that can be identified as federal election activity. And any services provided during a given calendar month by an employee of a state, district, or local party who spends more than 25% of his compensated time during that month on activities in connection with a federal election, including federal election activity mentioned above. This is something that several committees got tripped up on. Number 4. If you have anyone who works for your committee, who's an employee of your committee, who's working on a federal election, this is compensated time. This is not his volunteer time. This is only his or her compensated time. If anyone spends more than 25% of the compensated time working on federal election, working on activities in connection with a federal election, that is qualifying as FEA, and you can get tagged for it. And that's why people have started keeping time cards and time sheets. And committees now are required to keep, well, I don't say required, but it is strongly, strongly, strongly advised that you keep a time card on all your employees so you know, especially if you do state and federal work, so you know how much time those employees are spending on different activities. Does anyone have a question about that? That is very important because several people have gotten tagged on that. Okay. Now, I won't go through the details on. Does anyone have any questions about those 4? Because if you don't, I won't go through the details on.
Hey, Paula, this is Tim Hagan.
Sure.
Hi. Alicia had to go off to a committee meeting, so yeah, it looks like there's no questions.
Okay, great. I won't go through the details on that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Okay, this is important too, for the registered committee. What federal election activity is not? If anything that refers to clearly identify candidates for non-federal office is not considered federal election activity. But I want you to go through this too. It may be considered federal activity if it otherwise qualifies as voter registration to get out the vote. So you have to be kind of careful if you're registered again, how you allocate the, how you send out the information on get out the vote, on campaign activity or things like that. If you're not registered, you also have to be careful because they can impute federal activity to you. And if they do impute that to you, then you can be required to register. You can be required to register. They can say that you indulge in federal activity and they can try to make you register. I don't know if they can force you, but they can try to make you register. Costs of state or local political conventions are not considered federal activity. Grassroots campaign materials, button signs, things like that are not considered federal activity. It is only for state and local office. Again, any voter ID solely for non-federal elections is not considered consider federal activity GOTV, again, exclusively for non-federal candidates. And anything that's minimal, like if there's a minimal cost, a minimal association with federal activity, they won't tag you on. But on websites too, this is one thing. Websites generally, if you put a link on your local website to a federal website, it's not a problem. If you, however, have that person's information on your website and say, give this person money and you're not registered, that could pose a problem. So generally, I haven't seen many problems with that. Some people have been asking questions about it, but a hyperlink is not a problem. If you can download voter registration forms or absentee ballot applications, that's no problem. Posting information about voting dates on your website is no problem, even if it's for sale. So, any questions about that? And this is a chart, which is very helpful, I think, that shows you the type of activity, the time period, and how you can pay for it. So, if you have questions, this is a really good source to go to, get some good examples. All right. Is anyone interested in Levin funds? If anyone's interested, I'll discuss it.
Yeah, it doesn't look like anybody does Levin funds.
No, okay.
One thing.
We'll skip Levin funds.
Okay.
Nope. Okay.
No.
All right. Then we'll go to party coordinated. Okay, this is something that's important, and this is coordinated activity. And this applies to both registered and non-registered committees. It applies to registered committees in that it is permissible, and it applies to non-registered committees in that it is not permissible. So, on both sides, you have to be cognizant of what a coordinated expenditure is. The definition is coordinate, means in maybe cooperation, consultation, or concert with, or at the request or suggestion of a candidate's authorized committee or their agent. Again, agency is very important, or a political party committee or its agent. The FEC applies a three-pronged test. And in order to be a coordinated communication, it has to satisfy all three parts of this test. So make sure that if you do anything like this, that you don't meet these tests. The payment prong is the first part of the test. The coordinated communication has to be paid for in whole or in part by a political party, committee, or its agent. That's usually easy to establish. The content prong and the conduct prong are more difficult to establish. So if you want to have a coordinated communication, look at the content prong and the conduct prong. It has to be a public communication that disseminates the candidate's campaign materials. It has to be a public communication that expressly advocates the election or defeat of a clearly identified federal candidate. Now, remember, that's election or defeat. It can be an opposition ad. It has to be a public communication that refers to a clearly identified House or Senate candidate or a clearly identified presidential candidate. The House or Senate is within 90 days. The presidential is within 120 days. The conduct prong is usually the one that most people trip up on. And that is the interaction between the campaign and the person paying for the communication. So if you, number one, pay for it. Number two, meet the content prong and that you disseminate it publicly. And it's a support opposition, it's within the time limit. If you don't coordinate it, then it won't be construed as a coordinated contribution. But if you coordinate with the campaign or the committee or the person paying for it, if there's some kind of interaction there, then it can be construed to be a coordinated communication. And it's, as I said, the conduct is usually the prong on which people trip up. So does anyone have questions about it? We can go through the detail if you want, or are you fairly secure with it?
It looks like there's no questions.
No questions, okay. I do want to emphasize though, if you think that you're going to be not registered, and yeah, we can figure this out, and we can tell them what to do and everything, don't do it. It's not worth it. I mean, they can figure it out. Don't trip up on the conduct part, because it's not as easy as you think. I know some people do it by having people who are on their campaign committees go out and work for, say, independent expenditure committees. But once they do that, they're not supposed to have any interaction. So that's the way it's supposed to work. Whether it always works that way is another issue. But just for your safety, don't do it. Okay. All right, moving right along. I want to look at joint fundraising. Federal, non-federal joint fundraising. And this is another issue, whether you are registered or not registered. Again, we're not attorneys, this is a legal opinion, but the main criterion is that federal candidates and office holders cannot solicit, receive, direct, transfer, spend, or disperse funds outside of federal limits or from prohibited sources in connection with elections. And this is going to come up when you have joint fundraisers where you want to invite federal elected officials, federal candidates to speak, and what can they say and what they can't say. I'm not going to go into corporation pacts and things and union pacts. That's not, I assume that's not something you want to address to. But this is in connection with federal elections. I'm sorry, did you have a question?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, no
okay.
questions.
Fundraising restrictions apply to the following. In connection with federal elections, federal candidates cannot solicit, receive, direct transfer, spend, and disperse funds in connection with federal elections unless the amount consists of federal funds that are subject to the limitations, prohibitions, and reporting requirements of the Act. The federal candidates also may solicit, disperse funds in connection with any non-federal election only in amounts and from sources that are consistent with state law and do not exceed the Act contribution limits. So what that means basically is that your state complies with Federal Election Commission limitations. Federal candidates can solicit money in connection with non-federal elections. But if you're in a state that accepts contributions from corporations, that accepts unlimited contributions, things like that, federal candidates cannot solicit or receive, et cetera, any funds in connection with non-federal elections in that state. Not only federal candidates, individuals holding federal office, their agents or their entities, none of them can raise money in connection with those elections. So, for example, you're having a party non-federal fundraiser. What can the candidate office holder do? He can attend, speak, or be a featured guest in an event where non-federal or levy funds are raised. He can solicit funds at an event only if his solicitation is limited to federal funds. So that means that he or you or whoever has to give a written notice saying only federal funds are being solicited at this fundraiser, and that you are limited to this fundraising limit, this contribution limit, that you have to be a citizen of the United States, yada, yada, yada. You can give an oral statement, and it has to be clear and conspicuous. So both a written and an oral statement, and you can't have it over in the corner behind the place where the people are taking the checks. It has to be clear and conspicuous. It has to be printed on your materials if you're handing out materials. Now, can federal candidates attend fundraisers? Yes, they can attend non-federal fundraisers. They can speak, they can solicit funds, again, as you said, if they're in compliance with the Act. But they have to clearly, again, as we just said, clearly state that these are federal funds that are being solicited. Now, the publicity is another issue for non-federal fundraisers. Party committees can use candidate office holders' names or likenesses in publicity that does not contain solicitation, that solicits only federal funds, that solicits non-federal or federal funds if the candidate is identified in a manner not specifically related to fundraising. So you can say he's a featured guest, you can say he's an honored guest, you can say the publicity also has to include the disclaimer that the solicitation is not being made by the candidate. So if you're raising non-federal money and you have a federal candidate or office holder, make sure that it's clear that he's not raising money for himself, that he is not making the solicitation on behalf of anyone else or on behalf of himself. Okay? Because people trip up on that all the time. And again, we talked about limiting it to federal funds. Okay. Oh, yeah. If there is a disclaimer, you can't use the candidate's office holder's name or likeness in publicity that solicits non-federal funds if the person is serving in a fundraising position. If he is serving as a treasurer, he's serving as chair of his fundraising committee. You can't use his name. You can't extend the invitation to the event, and you can't sign the communication. So this is for candidates also, but it's also for the party because you don't want your candidates to get in trouble. Let me see. Clear and conspicuous, we discussed that. It has to be very clear. It has to be obvious. If you state it orally, it has to be made. I would give the disclaimer at the beginning of the speech and at the end of the speech. Here are some examples of permissible solicitations. And it says the Freedom Party non-federal account. Again, that's important that you say that it's the non-federal account or the federal account, depending upon what you're using, but you specify. Even if you're not registered, make sure that you say it's non-federal. Cordially invite you to an event with Honorary Chair, U.S. Representative Jane Doe, da-da-da. You can identify the person in any manner that doesn't contain a solicitation. There's no solicitation there. The disclaimer says it's paid for by the Freedom Party, not authorized. Now this is the non-permissible. Senator John Smith invites you to a fundraising event. No, can't say that. Please RSVP with your $25,000 contribution. No. And you can't cure the problem, as it says, by putting in a disclaimer that, this is really okay, but we just did it this way. No. This is clearly impermissible, so don't send out anything, whether you're registered or unregistered. Don't send out anything of this nature. Okay, those are the things that I thought were important to cover. Does anyone have any questions or?
Paula, can you go back to the last slide and show the example of the permissible?
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
The permissible.
Can you go back to the last slide and show the permissible communication?
Permissible, sure. Oops, sorry. Here it is. Permissible. It just says, Freedom Party invites you to a fundraiser with honored speaker. It doesn't say fundraising chair. It doesn't say U.S. Senator John Smith invites you to a fundraiser. It says Freedom Party invites you to a fundraiser. And it specifies that it's the non-federal account so that everyone knows that they're not giving federal money. And the disclaimer says our connections are with this event are by the Freedom Party and not by Senator Smith. So it's pretty clear.
Do you have questions on that?
Okay.
Star Child, question for Paul.
Hi, Paula. This is Star Child
I beg your
from the Libertarian National Committee.
Speaker's up here.
Oh, where
No
should
problem.
where should I be speaking to?
The computer.
You're going to have to get right on top of it. She
Okay.
can hear me from here.
Hi, Paula. This is Star Child, the at-large representative on the LNC.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, good. How are you? This is something I've been wanting to ask your thoughts on anyway. You let me know if this is too off topic, but since you're here virtually giving this presentation. As you know, we used to have a system in this party where there's one unified membership where you could pay, a fee and join both a state party and a national party at the same time. And my understanding is that got dropped basically because of government campaign rules. Do you know of any way, have any suggestions on how we might be able to bring back some sort of unified membership plan that wouldn't fall afoul of these government finance rules?
All the parties that participated would have to be registered.
And right
You
now,
could do it if all the money went into a federal account.
right now, just over half of our state affiliates are not registered.
So they would have
Right.
to individually
You could
register
do it with-
state party affiliates. We couldn't somehow register people en masse. They'd have to keep up with those as individual states.
Assuming it's
Well,
registered with-
no, I think in order for let's see, you could do it. Are you talking? Okay, because I'm thinking about like an association membership where the state kicks back a certain amount to the national party. If you just wanted to have it informed and you weren't sharing money, sure you could do it that way.
I mean, that's
So if
how.
you just wanted to have the format.
Yeah, that's how we used to do it. And I part of the reason I'm asking is I've always been a little bit unclear, exactly how this was prohibited. Like, why can't we have a thing where people want to join the Libertarian Party, they pay, say, it's $25 right now, and then part of that would go to the National Party, and part of that would go to the State Party.
Now, what you could do it from a top-down level, because remember, again, the National Party can give money to non-federal funds in the state party. So if they wanted to join the National Party and make a contribution of $100, and then the National Party kicks a certain amount of that to the state party, they could do it that way. That would be permissible. I don't know if you want to do it that way.
But you couldn't do it the other way around. The State Party couldn't collect the money.
No, you can't do it the other way. See, that's the issue.
Okay.
If you're registered, you can do it the other way. But if you're not registered, you can't do it the other way.
And you have to register.
You can do it from the national to the state.
You'd have to register
Right.
each
You can
specific
do it from-
individual state party.
Yeah, the state party, if the state party is receiving the funds, they wanted to send the money to the national party, would have to be registered.
I see. Thank you.
But the national party could accept the money and send it to the state party without the state parties being registered.
I've actually got a follow-up on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a couple of real quick questions to follow up on that. Number one, if
Sure.
you have a form from National that has, let's say, 2 check boxes that says, I want to pay $50 to National, I want to pay $50 to the state, just for easy math.
Mm-hmm.
They write one $100 check and it goes to National. Is it okay if it's pre-allocated that $50 of that is going to go to the state?
So it would be an earmark contribution.
Basically, yes.
You can do an earmark for the federal. I'm not sure about the state, and some of that is if you're not registered. So if it were
Right.
strictly between the federal accounts, yeah. If
Okay.
it were not,
if you're talking about a state party, then I'm not sure about the laws of the state. I don't see why it wouldn't be permissible, but I think it would depend partly on the laws.
But from the federal,
between two federal accounts, yeah.
Yes.
Two federal accounts you'd be able to do that.
what about from the FEC's perspective, not worrying about the particular state laws, but from the FEC's perspective, if it's earmarked money out of an FEC account going to a non-FEC state party? Just from the federal perspective.
I don't think that's a problem. I don't want to say it, but I'll check with them on that. I don't think there would be a problem.
All right. Thank you. That's all I need.
Mm-hmm. But I will definitely check that because I'm not certain.
Okay, Paula, this is Tim again. I follow up to Ken's question. Isn't there a prohibition against the National Committee or members of the National Committee from raising non-federal funds? So is there a problem with National sending out something or having something on their website saying, donate, we'll give part of the money to the state affiliate, which if the state affiliate is not filing with the FEC, so it would be going to non-federal funds?
Oh, no, now see, when you say non-federal funds, all the funds that the FEC raises are federal. You can't raise non-federal funds, but you can give them to a non-federal account. So you can only raise money in coordination with the limits. But you can send that money to a non-federal account. What they're concerned about is that you not break their fundraising rules.
Okay.
But you can send it pretty much, I mean, as long as it's not illegal, as long as it complies with the state regulations, you can send that money to the state.
All right.
Now, whether you can designate it specifically for a certain state, no. And you can't raise money outside of the federal rules. They have to comply with the limits. So you can't have more than, 32.4 for the national party.
I have a follow-on question with the national party.
I'm sorry, Tim. I think I do understand you. Also, that if you are transferring money on behalf of the state party, if you're transferring to the federal account, again, that has to comply with federal rules for that individual. So if you're earmarking it, if you're a conduit or earmarking it, that has to comply with his restrictions for contributions to the state or local party. If it's, to the federal account. So he can't contribute more to you to transfer over than he could contribute to the federal account. But if it's to the state account, then it will have to comply with the state regulation and also your federal regulation. So you couldn't like if the state limit is unlimited, you couldn't transfer unlimited amounts up to the state. Right. You have to contribute what the federal requirement was. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a follow-on question to that. If the national party were to make a
I cannot hear.
Yeah, I have a follow-on question to that. This is Jeff Dimmitt. I've spoken to you before, Paul. I don't know if you remember me or not from South Carolina. But if the national party were to go to relay or transfer a earmarked contribution back to the state affiliate, would the national party take on any liability for making sure that the state affiliate is registered and reporting to a local or the state equivalent to the FEC within that state?
If they transfer it into the non-federal account, so for example, and again, I'm not sure if you can earmark, I'm talking about the federal account, I'm not certain about whether someone can earmark a contribution to a non-registered committee. I have to check that. So I'm not sure about that. To a federal account, the person's already registered. But if it's going to a non-federal account, I'm not sure about earmarking that. So I'll have to ask the FEC about that.
Okay. All right. And if the national party were to transfer it to Joe in Kentucky, they got to make sure that Joe in Kentucky isn't just putting it in the local bank account, but he in fact is telling the state of Kentucky about all these transactions. and everything that's going on, right? I mean, it's got to be tracked.
Well, the national party is reporting all its transactions,
To the feds,
so those are publicly disclosed.
but they got to make sure that they're doing that responsibly and transferring it to entities that themselves are registered at least with a state unit of government, right?
12:30 to 12:45.
How do you mean? I'm sorry,
I mean, there's some
not
obligation.
understanding the question.
Okay.
No, my question is that if the national party is taking money and transferring it to a state affiliate that is not registered with the FEC, that they at least have to make sure that that state affiliate is registered with the applicable unit of their state's government that is the equivalent of the FEC in that state, right? I mean, they can't just be taking
Right,
money.
there's not as far as I know, there's not a federal requirement for that. I can check. But,
Yeah,
most of it I deal with the registry.
well, if the national party resurrects the UMP, that would be something that they would need to know about, is that if they have an obligation.
I would think, oh yeah, no, from a responsibility standpoint, obviously, I can't say that that's a regulation,
Yeah.
but from a responsibility standpoint, obviously.
Okay, all right, well, that's my question.
Hey, Paula, Star Child again. One more unrelated question for you. What is publicly available, or what is publicly required to report as far as salaries, paid employees of the Libertarian Party? Do we list individually salaries with the FEC, and if so, where would that information be found?
The information on salaries, individuals are required to report their salaries at net, not at gross. And
net per person,
you
or
do not
net,
have to
net for
disclose
the
your
whole staff?
I beg your pardon?
Net per person, or net for the entire staff?
Net per person.
Okay, so
So
when you say
each
net, you mean like
individual-
before tax income, basically?
No, after.
Or I'm sorry, I mean
No, after tax.
after tax income is.
After tax, right.
And what would be the
You
website?
report after tax. What would be the best one?
The website if people want to see that information, because
Oh, www.fec.gov. All the committee's reports are reported online. So hold on, let me show you where to get that.
and that's for every paid employee of the party. Would that include like interns?
And for every paid employee of every party, of every candidate, of everybody, you have to report all that information. All the vendors, searchable.
Yeah, if you have a specific
Okay,
URL
go
for the
to-
Libertarian Party, then. Oh, okay, you're looking it up now.
Yep, I've got it up now. Okay,
I was
so
looking at the overhead.
say Libertarian. And here are all the filings right here. And they go back to, boy, when did we start? Well, they go all the way back. And these are all the filings. And the national parties are required to file monthly. So all the presidential committees, everybody is out here.
Okay, and so you're saying in those individual filings you could find breakdown of what each staffer is making in the LP or in a presidential campaign?
Yeah?
Okay.
You can get everything.
Is that? Could you open up one of
And
those
you
so
can
we
get
can,
it in,
just so people can see what they look like, and if I don't know if the
Yeah,
information
you
is
can
kind of
get it
buried
in-
in there, or if it's easy to.
you can get it in metadata format, you can get download, you can download it in CSV format, XML format, PDF format, HTML.
Maybe HTML would be easier to see online right now to
Yeah.
look at a sample one.
So here's the last report, February month. It looks like this. And you can just scroll through.
The 71 pages just for one monthly report, huh?
That's actually a
Oh,
short
please,
one.
have you?
That's
The
a short one.
presidentials
That's a
were
short one.
10,000, 20,000, 100,000 pages. They're huge. These are small. Okay. Any other questions?
Well, do you know what page or what you'd be looking for in that 71 pages?
Oh, you look for if you're looking for expenditures, you're looking for Schedule B, which is,
Yeah, or on that page it shows that, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, that's where the expenditures show up.
Schedule A are the, Schedule B are the expenditures. There I am.
Right now I'm seeing financial agent,
Okay.
federal tax deposit.
They're all on Schedule B. Everything's arranged alphabetically.
Could you pull that up real quick if it's not too much trouble? People can see what it looks like.
That's it right there.
Schedule B
Yeah,
for the report.
right.
Yeah, this is Schedule B.
That's scheduled.
Hey guys, real quick.
Okay, I'm just not seeing any staff titles or salaries or anything here.
You just have to look through it. I can't go through the whole thing right now.
Okay, no, I was just trying to help people understand how to look up this information if they wanted.
Yeah, no.
Okay. Last thing, is there, do you have a phone or email if people want to follow up with you and ask you questions about this or other FEC related stuff you can give out?
Sure. Yes. You can call me on 202-434-4530. And my email address, it's usually better to get me by email. Paula, Paula, .Edwards, EDWARDS, at electionmachine.com.
Election what?
Machine, one word, ELECTIONMACHINE.com.
Thanks so much, Paula.
Sure, no problem. Any other questions?
Well, I think we're about out of time, and I want to thank you. This is Tim Holman. I had to step out for a few minutes and deal with other issues, but I hope it sounded like it was a very informative session. There were really good questions when I walked back in here. So thank you very, very much for your time. Is everybody good? We don't have any more quick questions? Are there real such things as quick questions in this? Paula, thank you again very much for your time. And folks, we're going to break for lunch here now. So eat, come back. Paula, thank you again. You can get a round of applause for Paula. And thank you very, very much.
Thanks a lot.
You have a good day, Paula.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. You too. Bye-bye.
I have to figure out how to close the WebEx. Come here. Where is the end? There's a place to tell it. I want to go. There it goes. So, cool. There's lunch for an hour, I believe. I'm pulling up the schedule right now. So maybe, yeah, there it goes. I'm going to pull up the schedule real quick just so everybody knows what the next training is. For those that are interested, don't forget, this is the party building track. There's also the candidate training track next door in case you happen to have found yourself in the wrong place. It happens. And I want to pull up the schedule here. So yeah, we're now at 11 to 11:30, or excuse me, 11:30 to 12:30, lunch on your own.